how much trust do you put in a paper once it's published? And who are you putting that trust in? If you think about it, it's just the authors, the editors, and the reviewers that have seen it so far. What I would trust more would be the input of the entire scientific community. After it's published, this becomes possible through something called post-publication peer review or post-publication critique. And I'll use these words interchangeably for this presentation. So this study had two parts. One, we looked at post-publication critique policies, and the second was we checked post-publication critique in practice at top ranked by journal impact factor across 22 scientific disciplines. Whoop. I was told the clicker was finicky. All right, it's the third day of the conference. It's 2022. We have limited attention span, so I'll give you the findings in 30 seconds. Then you can go back on Twitter. If you have another 9 minutes, I'll explain it again with a little more detail, hopefully. And so 2/3 of journals we looked at offer post-publication critique article types, which if you flip it around, 1/3 don't offer post-publication critique article types. There's often limits imposed on these. The median limit is 1,000 words, and the time to submit is 12 weeks. And finally, post-publication critique is rare. Only about 2% of the articles we looked at were linked to a post-publication critique. And these are commentaries, letters to the editors, or kind of web comments below the paper where you can enter a comment. I got a picture of Tom Hardwick up here, who is the project lead. So if you have questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them, but if you have criticisms, please direct them to Tom. He's somewhere in the audience. He was up here yesterday. All right, what was our rationale for doing this? Poor quality research frequently survives peer review. Surprise, we're at the peer review Congress, we know this. Post-publication critique falls within the Mertonian norm of organized skepticism. And if we truly have a scientific system of self-correction, then we would need to have some sort of critique. I'd like to point out that post-publication critique doesn't just have to be a formal publication with a DOI in a journal. It can be, your talk over coffee later today. It can be a blog post. It can be on Twitter. But in this study, we're looking at just the more formal end of it, where the article, where it's published in a journal. So our objective was to describe how influential journals across scientific disciplines handle criticism in the form of post-publication critique. And because we're scientists, we need to operationalize exactly what we mean by post-publication critique. And that was any journal-based avenue for sharing peer-initiated. So it had to be initiated by a peer, not by the journal itself. Critical discourse, so not just an advertisement for something that was published in that journal. Then it had to be related to specific research article previously published in that same journal. And again, we had two studies to this. And the first was on journal policies, and the second was on post-publication critique in practice. All right, so what did we do? In terms of policy, we sampled 15 top-ranked journals according to journal impact factor across 22 high-level scientific disciplines. And we extracted information from their websites on the type of post-publication critiques they offer. There's about 12 different types, but we bin them into letters to the editor, commentaries, and web comments. We checked if they had limits in terms of the reference numbers, the length of the document, and time to submit after the original publication, and whether they were members of COPE, because COPE has this nice statement that journals must allow debate post-publication. If you keep reading, they also allow it in PubPeer. So results for the first study, I'll just draw your attention to the column in red. That is across all 330 journals. The 5 columns next to that, that's just dividing into different disciplines. There's 3 boxes highlighted there. The first one shows that 63% of journals have a type of post-publication critique. Flip the other way, 37% don't. Over half of them have quantitative limits, which are the median 1,000 words, interquartile range 500 to 1,200. And then less than half have a strict limit on time to submit, but those that do have a median of 12 weeks after the target article is published, with an interquartile range of 4 to 26. And this limit is obviously unfair, because how can you be expected to reply in 4 to 12 weeks, say, if you're on maternity leave, or if you're taking, a European-length summer vacation? Not jealous, don't worry. All right, clicker's working.
The machine is getting tired.
All right, study 2, when we looked at in practice, do people actually use post-publication critique? We looked at the 207 journals that offered a type of post-publication critique, and we looked at 10 articles from each journal randomly selected from the year 2018. We estimated the prevalence of post-publication critique in 2 different ways. So our primary pre-registered estimate was, after extracting the 10 articles, how many of those 10 are linked to post-publication critique. So that has the shortcoming that the link has to be clear on the web page that's hosting the article or on that article. Our secondary estimate, we looked at 10 articles from each journal and assessed whether that article itself was post-publication critique. And that has the shortcoming that it would need to be indexed in Web of Science, which we used, for us to identify it. So for example, below the line web comments wouldn't be seen by our secondary estimate. Then after we did this, one investigator on our team, Tom, looked at 58 post-publication critiques, and he kind of looked into some details about what they contained. So results for the in practice part. First, our first estimate, we found that about 2% of articles were linked to post-publication critique, and this was distributed across 22 of the 207 journals. Our secondary estimate found about 5.6%, and this was distributed across 47 of the journals. You can see the 2 graphs here depicting across the 22 scientific disciplines how frequent our primary estimate and secondary estimate were. At the top, you have medicine, then psychology, psychiatry, multidisciplinary journals, and you also have immunology and neurosciences up there. And then most of the other fields have very little post-publication critique. Now, finally, from our primary estimate, the 58 post-publication critiques that were identified, only 2 of them led to a correction, and 41 of 44 authors who replied asserted that their core claims remained unchanged. And so even though the authors maybe aren't changing their opinion, at least now there's a conversation that a reader can see, author and then reply or post-publication critique. So in summary, there's substantial variation in policy and practice around post-publication peer review. Post-publication critique was rare. There's restrictive lengths on time to submit and word limits. Clinical medicine had a much more robust and active culture of post-publication critique than any other field, but they also imposed very strict limits, sometimes down to 2 weeks to submit or a minimum of 175 words. And finally, post-publication critiques appears to not really affect authors' conclusions, but again, that isn't necessarily ideal, but at least it still provides the information from 2 perspectives for the reader. Not quite there, one more slide. So some policy ideas, from very simple ones to more complex ones. Offer post-publication critique. Journals could, those 37% of journals could put it in their author guidelines that they offer 1 additional article type, that is a letter to the editor or a commentary. We could use soft limits around word lengths and references, and of course remove time to submit limits, because some people like vacation and they're unfair. There's the caveat that lowering barriers might increase proliferation of poor quality criticism, as we've seen with access to the internet being extremely simple and some poor quality conversations happening on the internet. Some more complex potential policy ideas would be to hire an independent post-publication critique editor who sits separately from the editorial board and can make their decisions without thinking about what impact it would have on the journal's reputation, but just trying to do what's best for the scientific ecosystem. And finally, some journals could, if you wanted to, adopt a 2-tier system where you have very short, rapid comments that can be written on the web, and then perhaps invite some of those to reply with a more scholarly, longer, more detailed article that gets a DOI. And so with that, I will thank you. I'll point out again, project lead was Tom Hardwick. He's contactable there. There's the preprint link here. It's now published in Royal Society Open Science. And if you have any post-presentation critique, happy to take it, but we might have some word limits if Lex imposes them, and we have a time to submit limit of 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Theo Bloom from BMJ, which has quite a lot of post-publication critique, including word limits, but no time limit. And yes, allows some to become a longer thing if they are detailed. This is really a call for collaboration. We have a data set of around 20 years of responses to articles in the BMJ with who who wrote the comment, what article they're commenting on, what the text says. We'd love to do more analysis of it from anyone who wants to help.
Great. Yeah, I'll be in touch after. Thank you.
Sounds like a nice invitation. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer Byrne from Sydney. I've read in the literature that some authors have described other barriers to post-publication critique, such as article publication charges for those kinds of commentaries. Is that something that you saw any evidence for?
I don't think we looked into article charges for the post-publication critique. Tom, somewhere he can correct me if I'm wrong, but we did look at whether the articles were open access or not open access. And between the target article being open access and the post-publication critique being open access, there's about 25% in each bin. So both open access, one open access, the other closed, one closed, the other open. But I don't have information on whether people had to pay to write their post-publication critique, which obviously we'd hope they don't have to.
Yeah, I understand sometimes they do, so that can be a barrier.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I'll consider it. Thank you for bringing it up.
We'll go to the microphone in the back. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Emily Ford from Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. I have some quibbles, but that could just be my perspective. I noticed, and thank you also. I noticed that you were coding things as high impact, and I guess I don't quite understand what that high impact journal means. So something to consider, which may be in a fuller paper. And then the second thing I noticed is that you had all these different disciplines listed out, but social sciences was all lumped together. And so I'm wondering if when you parsed it out, because I noticed you had immunology and some other things that I myself would lump into bench science. If you parsed it out to make it a little bit more granular in the social sciences, would that have changed any of your data? And have you considered looking at that?
I think it would have changed the results because the 22 scientific fields, that's from Claravit, they have a system of organization. We need to choose some sort of system. But like any system, it has flaws. Another one is that psychiatry is put in psychology and psychiatry rather than medicine, which a lot of people would argue should be in the medicine and psychology should be separate. And then psychology is not in the social science box. So yes, there are shortcomings to it, and those are real. But based on that categorization, we can't overcome those. But we could create another categorization to try to get into the more fine detailed.
Thank you.
Ivan Oransky from Retraction Watch, and I'll just mention a conflict of interest here. Relevant is that I'm a volunteer member of the board of directors of the Twotier Foundation. Really interesting. I remember seeing the preprint on OSF and was obviously very intrigued. And you, of course, excluded sort of everything that is outside of journals, which seems quite reasonable. So I guess my question and maybe suggestion, because it's probably something you couldn't have looked at now, is how has this changed over time? Because again, relevant in terms of Twotier, that, in many ways, basically evolved and was created because so many journals were essentially excluding anything that anyone, with all due respect to journal editors, would consider reasonable in terms of critiques. So is there a way to do that? I don't know how you would do that. So I'm wondering if the evolution here, because you're looking at it now when Twotier is basically 10 years old, and there are other methods too. I mean, Twitter is however many years old. So I'm wondering do you think there's a way to look at how this has evolved over time?
Yeah, so the way the study was, it was cross-sectional, so we just call it 1 year and the documents at one point in time, but we could look at this, use the same methodology, and Tom Hardwick, who led this project, is very impressed with his ability to make things reproducible. So somebody else could go just take his documentation in 2 years or 5 years. So going forward, it would be really easy to see changes by just taking what has been done and just replacing the data numbers, clicking go on CodeOcean, and then you'll get your new graphs. In terms of going to the past, it would be hard to see journal policy because those documents wouldn't be archived. But in terms of the prevalence of it, that would be detectable with either method of the estimates we use. But we didn't do that in the present study.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We go to that microphone at the back first, then that one, and then that one. Please go ahead.
Kirsten Patrick, Editor-in-Chief, CMIJ. So recently we had a retraction of a letter, and it got us to reevaluate our letters process, which I think in terms of your language would mean that we had raised the bar of difficulty to get a comment published. Now people have to meet certain criteria, and then raised it again to get it published. And one of the things that we considered was whether letters that are considered for formal publication as articles should be peer reviewed. Did you see in any of the work that you did whether any journals ever peer review letters?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. We did look at whether the journal's instructions said whether something was peer reviewed. Often there was no statement about whether it was peer reviewed or not. On many occasions, it was at the editor's discretion. And sometimes it said it would be sent for formal peer review, sometimes it wouldn't. I don't have the figures with me right. I wrote down a bunch of numbers right before I came up here, because I don't have my slides to flick through all of them quickly and find it. So I don't have the exact numbers with me, but if you check out the paper, we did analyze that and all that information is there.
Microphone in the back. The perspective from machine learning, most likely.
And Nihar Shah, Carnegie Mellon University. Just a random thought, like a lot of critique and commentary about papers happens on social media like Twitter.
Mhm.
So have you seen anywhere the following, that along with the publication, the journal will also give a hashtag for the paper, and then it'll, along with the paper, it'll also show the Twitter feed for that hashtag. So it'll include a lot of the discussions if it happens on social media.
I think that's an amazing idea also because it could be implemented by a single journal. You don't need, buy-in from everybody. You could just have a single journal that says, oh, you know what, we're gonna, yeah, no, that'd be interesting. We didn't look into that at all, but that's a really interesting thought. But when we were doing this, we were really thinking about making sure the main article is linked to the critique. But what you're saying, if that hashtag is included on the original article, then it
Yeah.
provides that. But then of course, Twitter can I'm not very experienced with Twitter, but I'm sure
Neither
a
am
lot of people have had a lot of interesting experiences with Twitter. Thanks for the
Thank you.
point.
Really interesting idea. Microphone in the front, please go ahead.
Thanks. Bennett Holman, Yonsei University. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on, right, you've been talking about sort of like reactive post-publication peer review where someone reads an article and writes a letter. Some journals like Brain Behavioral Sciences will publish a target article and then solicit commentary from people who they think would add something to or have some interesting critiques. So do you have any thoughts about sort of journal initiated post-publication peer review?
Yes, the Brain and Behavioral Sciences model, which is they get a target article, it's kind of a thorough review on something and invite 20, 30 people to submit 500-word commentaries. I think that's a great model for reviews to get like a snapshot of a particular topic at a particular time. But as far as I know, that's not really for primary research. The way that system's set up. In terms of soliciting reviews, there are journals that will solicit commentaries, but often those are to praise the article that's there to bring more attention to it. And so I think journals inherently have some conflict of interest if they're inviting people to peer review their article, that they would want them to, or to comment on the article that's there, that they want, a positive outlook on it and expansion rather than something very critical of what they've accepted to publish. And so I think it needs to have the option to be, I think what would help us is a culture where the peer initiated aspect of it is very important, that anybody can submit and it gets published if it's reasonable. And you don't need that editor to ask for it. Thanks for the question.
Well, thank you very much again for this